Hello and welcome back to Unscripted, where we talk about all things movies. Now, it's been a while since I've uploaded an episode, but this week we're coming back strong with an episode all about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Sit back, relax, and jump into this magical journey of the making of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone with me.
I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was directed by Chris Columbus, produced by David Heyman. The books, were written by J.K. Rowling, the production designer was Stuart Craig, and the screenplay was written by Steve Kloves. And before we get into any information about the movie, I think it's important that everybody knows how exactly this book came to be. So the book follows the story of an 11-year-old Harry Potter as he transitions into life as a wizard and learns about his past. Raised by his muggle aunt and uncle, Harry learns he is a wizard like his parents before him who were killed when he was a baby. This information he learns from Hagrid, a half-giant who takes him to buy his school supplies and to the train station before leaving him to deliver a mysterious package to the wizarding school's headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Harry learns more of how he lost his parents, learning also that he was meant to die, the only evidence of this being a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. Harry makes friends with pureblood Ron Weasley and Muggle-born Hermione Granger, and together they work out what Hagrid's mysterious package was and band together to protect it from Lord Voldemort, the man who killed Harry's parents. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published in the United Kingdom on June 26, 1997, and was published as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the United States in 1998. Since then, over 450 million copies have been sold, and it has been translated into over 80 languages. Rowling came up with the idea for Harry Potter while she was delayed on a train from Manchester to London in 1990. During the next 5 years, she planned out the 7-book series and in 1995 found a home for her story at Bloomsbury. However, before being accepted for publication at Bloomsbury, the manuscript for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was offered to at least 8 other publishers. The manuscript was presented by Bloomsbury employees to their colleagues in the form of a scroll. Nigel Newton, founder and chief executive of Bloomsbury, took it home to his daughter Alice, who was 8 years old at the time. Alice read the chapters in the scroll, then gave her thoughts to her dad. She really enjoyed it, and actually even wrote a note about it. Here's what that note says. The excitement in this book made me feel warm inside. I think it is possibly one of the best books an 8 to 9-year-old could read. And that's the note that little Alice gave to her dad after she read the book. At the next day's meeting, Nigel approved the proposal that the Philosopher's Stone should be published by Bloomsbury. While Rowling was writing her book, she would also sketch so that she could see the characters and the scenes in her head. She sketched out a layout of the Hogwarts grounds for her editor and included a little note with it saying that her sketches were how she always imagined the layout of the grounds. However, illustrations in any illustrated versions of the book are done by Jim Kay. In the first book and film, Harry, Ron, and Hermione spend a significant amount of time trying to find out who Nicholas Flamel is, eventually discovering that he is an alchemist and the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel, the character, was based on the real person Nicholas Flamel, who was once thought to be an alchemist but never actually made a Philosopher's Stone. He lived in Paris as a landlord and bookseller until he died in 1418. He was buried at the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie in Paris. While writing her books before she landed on a hat for sorting, Rowling brainstormed several different ways of sorting, including but not limited to statues of the original heads of houses coming to life and selecting students for their houses, prefects choosing students for their houses, and a question or a riddle being presented to the student to sort them. J.K. ultimately ended up choosing the hat for sorting, though. And Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was actually the only book that Rowling typed on her old electric typewriter. And one thing she would do often was cut ideas from one book and then reuse it in another book later on. Now that we know a little bit about how the books themselves were written, we'll move on to the movie, starting with pre-production. And one thing that is really important when it comes to making movies is going to be your producer. They are the ones that help to provide the funds for the making of the movie. So the producer for this movie was David Heyman. And in the winter of 1997, Heyman's assistant went into his office with an unpublished manuscript by an unknown first-time author that she liked. She recommended it to him, and he was skeptical at first, but he took it home and decided to read a few pages that night before he went to bed. He ended up staying up reading until 4 in the morning, and he finished the book. He loved it and knew he had to make it into a film. The next morning, he sent a copy to his childhood friend, Lionel Wigram, an executive at Warner Bros., and a few weeks later, negotiations to get the rights to the book were underway. Warner Bros. Obtained the rights to the first 4 books for $2 million. He then met J.K. Rowling a few months later, and the deal at this point was now closed and books were published, and he found that she was excited about the possibility of a film. He assured her that he wished to keep the film as faithful as possible and said she was a great collaborator. After that, he set out to find a screenwriter. Copies of first editions were sent to many writers, all of which rejected the project except for one, Steve Kloves. After he had secured a screenwriter, he began searching for a director and hired Chris Columbus in March 2000. Now, the screenplay was written by Steve Kloves. He was the only screenwriter to say that he wanted to be signed on to this project. He started working on the screenplay for the first Harry Potter film in the late 1990s. As a screenwriter, he received envelopes from his agency containing synopsises of novels that could potentially be used to make films. And often he would ignore them, but one day he didn't for some reason. He doesn't know why, but he opened this particular envelope that was sent to him that day. He went through all the synopsises quickly, unpersuaded by any, until he came to the last one, from an author he had never heard of. This one he stopped on was, you guessed it, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, by J.K. Rowling. It was a fanciful title and name. He was unpersuaded by the name, but his eyes fell to the logline, which is a synopsis of a synopsis, which read, "A young boy goes to wizard school." Kloves wasn't much into fantasy at this time, but this line hit him a bit differently, and he read it again. The next thing he knew, he was in a bookstore looking for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. He bought it and took it back to work, convinced to buy it after reading the first line. At work, he read through his lunch break. After reading 30 pages, he called his agent to tell them he wanted to do this book, that this book was going to be his next project. He said to his agent that the book was special, and that if it stayed that way, he wanted to do it. Needless to say, it did in fact stay special, and if you ask me, it still is. And that's how Steve Kloves joined the journey of making Harry Potter. Next up, we have the director, Chris Columbus. He was introduced to the book by his daughter, and he knew immediately that he wanted to make it a movie. He said he saw the world in his head, and he could see the movie in his head too. But when he asked his agent to look into it, he was met with a rather discouraging response. His agent told him to get in line, as lots of other directors also wanted this project. Some of these directors included Terry Gilliam, Jonathan Demme, Alan Parker, and even Steven Spielberg. After meeting with David Heyman and Warner Bros., when Chris talked passionately about how he saw the film, the position was his. And after finding a director and getting a script done, the now daunting task of casting for the film began. But before we get into casting, let's talk about a few other people who are vital to the making of this film first. First up, we have Duncan Henderson. He was the executive producer. And then we have production designer Stuart Craig. In his first meeting with J.K. Rowling, he asked basic questions about the world, and to answer him, Rowling drew him a simple map of Hogwarts and its surroundings. She took only a few minutes because she already knew where everything needed to be, and everything had a specific place. And then we have John Scale, the director of photography. He was approached by the executive producer, Duncan Henderson, about signing on to Harry Potter while he was in London scouting for a new project. He bought the book and read it on the flight back to Australia, and then he called Henderson to sign on to the project as soon as he landed. The budget for this film was $125 million US. And with all of those people signed on, ready to go for this film, casting could begin. Chris recalled that there were thousands of kids there to audition, saying any kid who had done a school play wanted to be in Harry Potter. And here are some qualities that determined who got the roles of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. For Hermione, some of the qualities that got Emma the role was she was bright, sharp, and she shared Hermione's sense of humor. For Ron, Rupert had a sort of mischievous quality, a wonderful sense of humor, and he had a real sense of soul, too. He also had amazing facial expressions, as you can see in the film. And then for Harry, Dan, they said his screen test was amazing, and in the more serious moments, he brought a haunted quality that you could see in his eyes, that Harry has in the books as well. And it was a look and a quality that you really can't teach. And for our casting directors, we have Susie Figgs, Karen Lindsay Stewart, Jane Jenkins, and Janet Hershenson. Casting began in late 1999, and by August 2000, the 3 leads had been cast. We have Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter, and here's how he was cast. In July of 2000, they actually still hadn't found their Harry Potter, and they were only 3 months from the first day of principal photography. The casting director had seen thousands upon thousands of young boys, and Chris and David had seen thousands of audition tapes, but they had no success in finding the perfect fit for Harry. One night, Steve and David went to the theater where they ran into Alan Radcliffe, a literary agent and Dan's dad, who introduced them to his wife and son. After meeting them, they all took their seats to watch the play, but David paid no attention to the play. He kept looking back at Dan. When the play was over, he got up to talk to the Radcliffes about Daniel auditioning for Harry Potter, but they had already left. The next morning, David called Alan and found out that Chris had seen Dan in the BBC adaptation of David Copperfield and had already expressed interest in Dan auditioning for the role of Harry Potter. Alan and his wife were reluctant, and it took a little bit of convincing to get them to let Dan go do the audition. Eventually, they agreed that Dan could meet with David as a first step. They talked, and they got to know each other, and the next day, Dan went to meet Chris. Then he went through a series of auditions. Then Chris finally announced that they had found their Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe. He was 10 years old when he was cast, and 11 during filming. Next up, we have Rupert Grint as Ron Weasley, and before he was cast as Ron, he was actually already a huge fan of the books, and his only experience in acting was in school plays and local theater groups for kids. When he heard about the open auditions through British program Newsround, he knew he had to make his audition tape different from all the others. He had to make it stand out from the crowd. So in his audition tape, he dressed up as his drama teacher, who was a girl, and then he did a rap about how he wanted to be Ron. Then he made and read his own script and sent it in. A couple of screen tests later, and he was told he got the part. He was 11 when he auditioned, and 12 when they started filming. And then we have Emma Watson as Hermione Granger. Now, the school Emma attended actually got the audition for the kids that went there. And she thought it was a strange way to get into it, because usually you have an agent, but she didn't have one of those at the time. The audition was held in their school gym, and she said it was kind of like a drama lesson, and that it didn't actually feel like they were auditioning. It was done with a group of kids, so the focus wasn't really on just one kid the entire time. And she was a fan of Harry Potter before auditioning, saying she was in the middle of the 3rd one when she started auditioning for the film. After filming, she actually saw more similarities between her and Hermione than she did before. She was 9 years old when she was cast in this film. James and Oliver Phelps were cast as Fred and George Weasley. James was Fred and Oliver was George, and they auditioned in the summer of 2000. James was reading the third book at the time, and rumors say that they would switch roles while filming sometimes, but they never actually did that while filming. They did switch roles a couple times in rehearsals, though. Tom Felton was cast as Draco Malfoy, and Tom was with a small group of boys for his audition. He himself had not read the books, so he didn't actually know much about the series, but the rest of the boys in his group were huge Harry Potter fans. Chris asked the boys to name their favorite scene from the book, and Tom, not having read the books, just said the same thing as the boy before him. He says he knew Chris saw straight through his answer and thinks it actually helped him. Next up, we have Matthew Lewis as Neville Longbottom, and he knew he wanted to be in it after he read the fourth book, and he had the opportunity to audition while he was in London. He was 12 years old during the first Harry Potter. Then we have Bonnie Wright as Ginny Weasley, Robbie Coltrane as Rubius Hagrid, and Martin Bayfield was his double. Richard Harris was Albus Dumbledore. Harry Melling was Dudley Dursley, Fiona Shaw, Petunia Dursley, Richard Griffiths as Vernon Dursley, Maggie Smith as Minerva McGonagall, Alan Rickman as Severus Snape, Ian Hart as Quirinus Quirrell, David Bradley as Argus Filch, John Hurt as Garrick Ollivander, John Cleese as Nearly Headless Nick, Sean Biggerstaff as Oliver Wood, Devin Murray as Seamus Finnegan, Alfred Enoch as Dean Thomas, Warwick Davis as Phileas Flitwick and the voice of Griphook, Vern Troyer as Griphook, Julie Walters as Molly Weasley, Mark Williams as Arthur Weasley, Chris Rankin as Percy Weasley, and Gizmo the Owl as Hedwig. So now we have our cast, that means we can start filming, right? Actually wrong. We can't start filming until we have sets. So, the next step, building sets. So before filming could begin, sets had to be completed, and the smallest of these sets was Harry's cupboard under the stairs at the Dursleys' house. And in order to film in this particular set, Stuart Craig, the production designer, said that they had to make the walls removable. Otherwise, the camera wouldn't be able to access the room. Stephanie McMillan was the set designer for this, and Craig said that the ordinariness of Harry's cupboard became a feature of the set. And then we have Diagon Alley. Now, the crew tried to think of somewhere in London that looked like Diagon Alley to use for location filming, but very few places look similar enough to it, and on the chance that they found one that did, there's always the issue of something modern being there that would prevent filming. So, to work around that, they built their own Diagon Alley set. Craig began with the idea of London in the works of Charles Dickens and did research on early 1800s London. They used that as a base idea and added some magical elements to create the Diagon Alley we know and love. When dressing the set, only one person could do it at a time because they had to use crane lifts in order to do it. The next set we have is Hogwarts, and Hogwarts is over 1,000 years old and has a lot of history. So when deciding how to bring it to life, they knew they wanted it to look real, not like it had been newly constructed. In order to achieve a real aged castle look, they studied some of the oldest educational institutions in Britain, Oxford and Cambridge universities. They also looked at several medieval cathedrals, including Westminster, Canterbury, and Salisbury. The final result from their research was an architectural style based on medieval Gothic, soaring columns, high-pointed arches, and elaborate carvings. The Durham Cathedral was the inspiration for Hogwarts' twin square towers. Stuart Craig's sketches of Hogwarts' exterior were developed into architectural drawings and then turned into a 1/24th scale model. The model was built in Shepperton Studios and was used for exterior establishing shots of the castle in the first 6 films. Another set we have is Hagrid's hut, and since there were 2 different scale Hagrids, there had to be 2 versions of Hagrid's hut. There was a regular scale hut and a large scale hut, within which the hut itself and everything inside was made larger. There were 2 copies of everything in the hut, regular and large scales. And then we also have the Great Hall, and Stuart Craig invested in real York stone to use as the floor of the Great Hall. This stone lasted through the filming of all 8 movies, so it was well worth the investment. Inspiration for the interior design of the Great Hall came from a 16th century hall located in Christchurch, as well as from Westminster Hall in the House of Parliament in London. Basic dimensions of the building in Christchurch were 120 feet by 40 feet, and they were kept when building the set. However, the windows were elongated and the doors were disguised in the wood paneling to make moving all 400 extras easier during filming, because how are you going to file everybody in through just that one set of doors within a reasonable amount of time to shoot any scenes you have in there? So hidden doors were the perfect solution to getting hundreds of extras on set to record and get a scene done in a reasonable amount of time. And the studio stages weren't actually high enough for the roof to be built, so visual effects took care of the roof. And that was also based on Westminster Hall. Another set we have is going to be your Quidditch pitch, and what they did for that was they built the base of the pitch and one tower, but the rest of it was done in post, so we'll go over the rest of that a little bit later today. We then have the Gryffindor Common Room, and this was Harry's first home experience, so Craig wanted to make the Common Room look and feel reassuring and comfortable. The last set that I have is going to be the chessboard from the chess scene. A giant chessboard and 12-foot tall chess pieces were built for this scene. The chess pieces were able to actually move, and they were radio controlled. Pieces battled each other, blew up, and crashed to the ground. There were lots of special effects used here, and Rupert Grint actually got to sit on one of the pieces, and he kept a broken piece of the horse. For this chess scene, you'll notice that there were a lot of practical effects used. And the reason for this is because Chris wanted to use as many practical effects as possible in this film. So we'll go over a few of the practical effects that they used for this chess scene a little bit later, but we are getting into all of those practical effects now, starting with Quidditch and flying lessons. Flying lessons were done on location at the Alnwick Castle. The actors were attached to rigs that would move them up and down to give the illusion of flying. And the next one we have is going to be Fluffy. And there was actually only one piece of Fluffy that was done with practical effects, and that piece was his paw that was on top of the trapdoor. A replica of the 3-headed dog's paw was made for the kids to push off the trapdoor that led to the stone. And then we also have Hagrid, which some people might find surprising, but there's a reason for this. Martin Bayfield was the large-scale Hagrid. He was the double for Hagrid. He was 6 feet 10 inches tall, and when he stood in as Hagrid, he would wear a bodysuit and an animatronic mask that looked like Robbie's face. For the items inside the large-scale hut, the set decorators bought whatever they needed for the regular-sized hut. Then the prop makers would recreate an enlarged copy of each item. And then finally, we have Hagrid's motorbike. Martin sat on a motorbike that seemed small, and a smaller scale copy of the bike was made for Robbie to use. We then have Gringotts the Wizarding Bank. The interior for this was shot on location in the Australia House in London, and this was done to make the bank look and feel more real and proper. Graphic artists made specific ledgers, credit slips, and stationery for it. They went above and beyond to make this seem realistic. And the props department actually even minted some galleons, sickles, and nuts. However, The Sorcerer's Stone was the only film to have money made with real metal because a lot of the coins went missing during the duration of filming. Next up, we have Ollivanders and the wands, and to represent Ollivander's inventory, Stephanie McMillan stacked the shop with 17,000 wand boxes. Each box was individually embellished with labels, runes, and other forms of identification. Many were also coated with enough dust to make them look like they had been there for centuries. All of them were arranged in such a chaotic order to appear that only the shopkeeper could understand the organization of them. Prop makers made wands for each individual character in this film as well. Platform 9 3/4 was actually filmed on location on a Sunday because the location was less busy. An imaginary location lying within the real-world location King's Cross, a major London train station. Platform 9 3/4 is accessed by running into a brick wall between the platforms 9 and 10, hitting the wall and magically appearing on the platform for the Hogwarts Express. And to achieve this, a practical hollow brick wall was made for Harry to run through, but most of it was actually done digitally. And then we have the Hogwarts Express. And the Hogwarts Express is actually the authentic locomotive named Olton Hall. It was built in 1937 and was in service until the year 1963. After that, it ended up in a scrapyard in South Wales, where it was then, quote-unquote, rescued in 1997 and rebuilt to be the Hogwarts Express in Harry Potter. And on the day they filmed at the station, a huge crowd actually eventually showed up and watched. Chris Columbus said it was a historic day for Harry Potter fans. And then we have the blizzard of letters. And to make this scene possible, 10,000 letters were printed on very light paper, the kind used for banknotes, so that they could be blown all over the place with ease. The Sorcerer's Stone was made out of a molded resin, and then the final practical effect, or prop, that I have is going to be for Quidditch once again. The prop department made broomsticks that they used throughout the series, and they designed the quaffle, bludgers, and a golden snitch that actually had fully operational mechanical wings. Next up we have costuming, and costuming was actually kind of simple. They based most of the costumes off of the costumes in the books, and the costumes are very book accurate. So if you want a description of all of the costumes, I would recommend going and reading the series. But there are a few things that I do actually really want to touch on that some people might have a problem with did or didn't happen in the books, in the movies. One thing is Hermione's buck teeth. Now, here's the thing with that. Emma actually did try the buck teeth, but there was a problem with it. The buck teeth impeded her speech, so she ended up not using them in the film so that she could properly talk. And then with a cast as large as the Harry Potter cast, that requires thousands of costumes. So over 600 school uniforms were created. There were costumes for even the child extras. Every child actor had a personalized costume dependent on what house they were in. And then I have a couple of things about Neville for you. Matthew Lewis, who played Neville, he actually wore a fat suit, buck teeth, and ear prosthetics to help make his ears stick out a little bit more during the film. And that is all I have for you about costuming. And once again, the costumes are very accurate to the outfits that the characters wear in the books. So if you want an accurate description about all of the costumes, I would recommend going to read the books, and it gives you a description of what each character wears so much better than I could. So now we'll move on to filming, and one fun fact that I found about filming was while the kids were on set, obviously they're of school age, and they have to do homework and get an education, so the kids did their actual homework while they were filming. And then we have the Dursleys' neighborhood. And for the first film, the crew filmed on location in a neighborhood with houses that all looked the same. The residents on the street they used all gave permission for filming. And production at this location unfortunately ran over the initial schedule, and the neighborhood was requesting too much money for them to film there again for any of the other films. And then we have Professor Quirrell's Defense Against the Dark Arts room, and that was shot on location at Lecoq Abbey in Wiltshire. They filmed in what was called the warming room, and the warming room is the only room in the abbey where the nuns could actually have a fire. And John Cleese, Nearly Headless Nick, when they were filming the part where he comes out of the middle of the table, he stood off to the side and spoke his lines over there. Now, the visual effects supervisor, Bob Legato, said that it was hard to get the kids to act surprised when Nick came out of their table, and this was because John might have been a little bit distracting as he read his lines off set. The kids would watch him instead of looking to where his character Nick would later be put in. And then a little bit about the Great Hall. They had a plan for the floating candles in the Great Hall, and the original plan for these floating candles was to have real lights, candle-shaped holders that contained oil and burning wicks, and they were supposed to be suspended from wires that would move them up and down on a special effects rig in order to give off the illusion of floating. However, there was an incident with a falling candle, and the crew quickly decided the candles would be added digitally in post in order to keep everybody safe. And then at the conclusion of filming, we move into post-production, where all of your special effects and stuff are added. And one of the biggest places we see some of these special effects and some CGI is actually going to be in our Quidditch scenes. And in the first film, everything except for the base and one of the towers was done digitally. Even though Chris wanted to do everything practically, the scenes still turned out amazing, and it looked real too. In the stadium, having people standing or sitting in the stands and the towers actually helped to give the scenes a more realistic sense of speed to the game when players would go flying past. And when creating Quidditch on screen, it's all mostly done on computers, so the actors are filmed separately. They're moved on their brooms, which are held and moved around by a rig in front of a blue or green screen, and then the colored background is added through CGI later on. In order to make sure the Quidditch game makes sense, a very detailed storyboard was carefully put together before filming could begin. The movements between the key shots planned out are then worked out in computers using an animation called pre-visualization. And this is a process that allows the filmmaker to see how everything will combine together in the final shot. Now, Fluffy, the three-headed dog, was also done mostly with CGI. To make him more realistic, the animators gave each of the heads its own personality, as well as allowed them to move independently of each other, and the different personalities provided more variation to the three-headed beast. In the chess scene we were talking about earlier, how there were a lot of practical effects with this, they still had to use some effects in post-production for it too, but there were very few digital effects used for this because most of it was practical. One of the moments that was done digitally is when one of the pawn soldiers comes alive and draws its sword. And with that, we come to the conclusion of post-production and filming, and we move on to the box office. Now, Warner Bros. Originally planned to release the film on July 4th of 2001, which made for a very short production window. But the date was pushed back after many directors backed out, and the film was officially released on November 16th of 2001. It grossed $974 million in the box office worldwide. To be exact, it was $974,755,371. It was the highest grossing film in 2001. Domestically, the box office earned $317,575,550, and internationally, it earned $657,179,821. And on opening night, it earned a whopping $90,294,621 in 3,672 theaters. And then, as always, when a film comes out, we also have awards and nominations that come with it. So I have in front of me pulled up a list of some of the awards and nominations that the film received, and I'm just going to go over some of the more significant awards. In 2002, Stuart Craig and Stephanie McMillan were nominated for the Oscar Best Art Direction and Set Decoration. In 2002, Judianna Makovsky was nominated for the Oscar Best Costume Design, and in 2002, John Williams was nominated for the Oscar Best Music Original Score. And then we have our BAFTA awards. In 2002, David Heyman, Chris Columbus, and Steve Kloves were nominated for Best Feature Film. David Heyman and Chris Columbus were also nominated for the Alexander Korda Award for Best British Film. In 2002, Robbie Coltrane was nominated for the Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role. Stuart Craig was nominated for Best Production Design. Judianna Makovsky was nominated for Best Costume Design. John Migley, Eddie Joseph, Ray Marin, Graham Daniel, and Adam Daniel were nominated for Best Sound. Robert Legato, Nick Davis, John Richardson, I apologize if I say this name wrong, Roger Guyett, and Jim Burney were nominated for Best Achievement in Special Visual Effects. For the Casting Society of America in the year 2002, Jane Jenkins and Janet Hershenson were nominated and won the Artios Award for Best Casting for Feature Film. And in 2002, at the Costume Designers Guild Awards, Judianna Makovsky was nominated and won the CDG Award for Excellence in Period/Fantasy Film. At the Grammy Awards in 2003, John Williams was nominated for the Best Score Soundtrack Album for a Motion Picture, Television, or Other Visual Media. And here are a few from the Young Artists Awards. We've got a couple winners in here, and I'll go over those ones. In 2002, Emma Watson was nominated and won the Young Artist Award for Best Performance in a Feature Film, Leading Young Actress. And in 2002, Rupert Grint was nominated and won the Young Artist Award for Most Promising Young Newcomer. Harry Potter is a series that really took the world by storm, and it changed the world, to be honest. It changed lives. It holds a very special place in a lot of people's hearts. I know it holds a very special place in mine. I felt like I grew up with these characters, even though all of these books came out before I was born. Harry Potter has made its way into theme parks. You can find a Harry Potter land in Universal Hollywood, Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade in Universal Studios Orlando, and there's even a new Ministry of Magic area in the new theme park Epic Universe, Universal Orlando. You also have The Cursed Child, which was actually even adapted into a stage play. And we have Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and that even got a couple movies into the series as well. In short, Harry Potter really changed the world, and it brought a lot of people together as well. I think it is one of the greatest movie series and book series to ever exist, and it did a lot for a lot of people. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all in the next one.